Hey there, welcome to the Future Programmer YouTube channel. In today's Java Basics video, we will be learning about method overloading in Java. So, without further ado, let's get started. Today, you will be learning about method overloading, which is a pretty useful topic to know about when using methods in Java programming. So what is methods overloading? Method overloading is defining multiple versions of one method with the same name, but the important part is that these versions have different parameters. In this case, different parameters doesn't mean that these versions have different parameter names, but that the number and or the data types of the parameters is different. So we're essentially overloading one method with multiple different sets of parameters. Now, why would we want to do such a thing? Let's think about a method that does some simple mathematical operation like squaring the input. Without method overloading, we will only be able to pass one type of number into the method's call, so either an int or a double, not both. With method overloading, we can overload the one method with two sets of parameters. So in this code block, we can see one method. Even though we see two method definitions, this is one method. It's just overloaded. We have the first overloaded method definition here. This square number method version takes an integer parameter called x. It squares it and returns the value of the result. This one does the same thing. It just takes a double parameter called x. So now, when we call the square number method, we can pass in either ints or doubles now. Java will look for the method with a parameter list that matches the list of arguments passed in the method's call, and run the code in that method version. Now you may think about, so why can't we just pass an int into a double accepting method? Because we know that would work. We can pass an integer into a method designed to accept a double, because there's an implicit conversion going on in the back. Now, we can definitely do that, but what if we want to do some sort of operation depending on the data type of the parameter? Let's say if we pass a double into the method, we want to first round the parameter or the argument before squaring it, whereas if we get an int, we just square it. In that case, it is very useful to use method overloading. And notice how the return type of the method varies depending on the parameter list. So the one that takes an int returns an int, the one that takes a double parameter returns a double value. Let's take a look at what happens when we call the square number method. So let's copy this code into an online Java editor like Replit, where you can see the color highlighting is back. So that's good. Let's copy, or rather paste, the code right here and copy these two print statements into our main method. Running this code, we should see the numbers 9 and 6.25 printed out on the right side. So the first time we called square number, we're passing in an integer value, a -3. Java will check against this one and this one. It will take a look at the parameters inside the parentheses. Does this one take an int? Or does this one take an int? It sees that this method version takes an integer value. So when we pass an int into square number, Java will run the code right here, since this has a data type that matches int. On the other hand, when we pass a double into square number, 2.5 is a double. So Java will run the version of square number whose parameter is a double. So it will run the code right here. Now you may not believe me, so let's take a look. Why don't we print something out in each method to verify this? So let's just print out system.out.println int. So in the square number method that takes an integer value, we print out int. And let's just do the same thing in the double version. We just print out double. And actually, let's just do print instead of print line. So we should see int 9 and double 6.25 without the spaces. Well, I was going to add say spaces. Let's just do this. So we get int 9 and double 6.25. So we know that when we pass an int, the method version that takes an int will be run. And when we pass a double, the method version that takes a double will be run. So even though we don't specify which overloaded version of the method to call, Java knows to look at the argument passed in. It will check that argument's data type against the data types of the parameters of the overloaded method definitions. And it will run the method version whose parameter list matches the argument list's data types. When an int is passed, the method whose parameter is an int is run. And the same thing with the double. We already did this with the toPrint statement, so let's move on to an exercise. Let's practice overloading methods by writing an overloaded method. This method will either take an int or a boolean. So this is different than what we did before. We overloaded a method with two numerical data types, which sometimes may not be necessary. On the other hand, this time we're overloading it with an int and a boolean, drastically different data types. If we pass an int into the method call, we will return 2 multiplied by that number. We will double that number and return it. Pretty straightforward. If we pass a boolean into the method, things get interesting. We will first generate a random integer. Then we will check, is the boolean parameter true? If so, we will double the random number we got up here and return it. If the boolean value is false, we will just return the random integer without doubling it. And so take a few moments to try this problem out on your own. I think it's a pretty interesting problem. And when you're done, come back to check your answer. So you could have written this multiple different ways, but let's take a look at one sample solution. So we got the method doMagic. You could have called this whatever you want. So we have 2 versions of the doMagic method. The first one takes an integer value, x. It returns 2 times x. So when an int is passed, that number is doubled and returned. So we return 2 times x, and we return an int. So that's fine. Now, it gets a little bit more complicated if we pass a boolean in. In this case, I've called the boolean parameter doDoubling. You could have called it whatever you want. If a boolean is passed, we will first create a random number using the math.random method. So we create a random integer here. And then we will check, is the boolean true? If so, we would return doMagic with random num passed in. Now, if you've already learned about recursion, then this may appear to be, it looks like recursion. However, keep in mind that random num is an integer. So when we call doMagic here, we're actually calling this one, this overloaded version of doMagic. We're calling the one that doubles the argument. So what this is doing is literally 2 times random num. I could have written it 2 times random num, but I just wanted to show you that we can actually call another version of an overloaded method in the method definition. So we can just use this to double the random number. If doDoubling is false, we would just return the random number without doubling it. So let's copy these 2 method definitions into our code editor. Let me just real quick paste this in. And let's copy our test code into the main method. Let's comment this out and run the code as it is now. So we called doMagic 3 times. The first time with an int, -4. This matches int x. So Java is going to take this number, multiply it by 2, and return it. So we got -8. Do magic true. It's a Boolean. It will run the code right here. Java will make a random number between 1 and 10, and it will check is the Boolean true. It is. So we will return 2 times the number. In this case, it looks like we got the random number of 9, and because true is do doubling is true, we return twice of 9, so we got 18. Third time, false. Passed into do magic, we run this code again. However, because do doubling is false, we return random num directly, which gave us 5. So this is a little bit more complicated example of using overloading in Java. And keep in mind that a method can have as many overloaded versions as is necessary. So we can have 20 different overloaded method versions if we need that. Now, the examples above showed overloading a method with different parameter data types. So we got an int versus a double, and in the second example, we had an int versus a Boolean. Methods can also be overloaded with different numbers of parameters. So we can have a method take either 1 int or 3 ints. So in this code, we have a method f. It has 2 versions. The first one takes 3 integer parameters, and it returns the sum of these values. The second will take only 1 integer, and it calls the method f with 3 different parameters. It passes a, 0, and 0. So what this will do is that when we call f with 3 ints, it will return the sum of these numbers. When we call it with only 1 int, that number itself, that 1 integer, will be returned since we're calling f a 0, 0. So that number will be passed into the first version. So we'll return the number here plus 0 as b and another 0 as c. So we get a again. Let's copy this code into our editor. Let's just delete these codes since we don't need them. And let me just write some code to test this. So if I delete these examples up here, system.out.println f, let's try 1, 2, 3. And let me just copy this. In the second example, let's just try 10. So we should get 6 and 10 printed out, because the first time we sum these 3 numbers in this method version. The second time 10 is passed in, 10 plus 0 gives us 10. Method overloading isn't really used all the time, but it can really be very helpful when multiple different lists of parameters can be passed into a method's calls. And there you have it, method overloading in Java programming. If you found this video helpful, please consider subscribing to the Future Programmer YouTube channel down below. And with that said, thank you for watching this video, and I hope to see you in future videos.